Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by a Full Press Coverage. Everybody can take a deep sigh of relief as there will be no labor stoppage in the NBA. The NBA Players Union and the league have come to an agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement that will be a 7-year deal. So basketball, plenty of basketball for the foreseeable future. But it's a very interesting CBA, Sap, because there's been a lot of changes, some financial, some in terms of the awards, some changes that didn't happen that people were thinking were going to happen. So we're going to talk about all of that on this show today and what you can expect from this new CBA. Sap, before we get into the weeds with everything, was there one big takeaway from the new CBA that stood out to you the most?
I think overall, both parties, Jet, realize that there's a lot of money at stake and you don't want to jeopardize that. Obviously, the league is negotiating a new TV deal, which is going to be in the range of 10 years, $75 billion, which is $7.5 billion per year, which comes to $250 million per team. That's a ton of money. We see the value of franchises going up to the point where the Phoenix Suns were just recently sold for $4.1 billion. Player salaries have never been higher, and they're only going to escalate. So I think the players, the owners, management just realize that there's a lot of money there. Let's not screw this up. I want you to take a bow, though, because this is something you've talked about for about 5 years, that to be eligible for All NBA and MVP and Defensive Player of the Year, that you should have to play a minimum amount of games. Well, that's part of the CBA. It's 65 games, which is roughly 80% of a full schedule. So I think that that's a good sign that we'll see more of the stars. The only takeaway from that is it sounds great on the surface, but most of the guys that have Supermax deals load manage anyway. Like, I don't think this is going to impact LeBron James or Anthony Davis or Kawhi Leonard. They already have their money. They've made their big share of their money. So they're not going to be impacted by this, but it does impact maybe younger stars in the league like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or De'Aaron Fox or whoever, that may be looking at a massive contract going forward. But take a bow, Jet, because you were on this 5 years ago.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think that Adam Silver obviously has listened to me throughout my career, and paid very close attention to any suggestions that I have to improve the league. So you're welcome, Mr. Silver. If you want to hire me, I'm available for work. Please, just reach out to my agent, John Sapichetti. So
I only take 3%, trying to be Lamar Jackson's agent, but he hasn't returned any of my phone calls.
Nah, he doesn't want any help. It's really worked out well for him not having an agent. But yeah, I mean, Sap, the NBA was adamant that they needed to do something to counter load management a little bit. And we've talked about this again for years, Sap, right? There was never going to be a perfect solution where they were just like, yep, that solved load management. Okay, it's over with. It's never going to have to be something we worry about again. Like you just mentioned, some of the players who already have their money, they're still going to do it. Even players who haven't necessarily gotten paid yet, like Kawhi Leonard's gotten paid. He's still young. He'll still load manage, even though he's due another big contract at some point, because that's just who he is. So there was never going to be a catch-all solution to this. But I do think that they've come up with a pretty good scenario to keep things, at least to make things better than what they've been. So like you said, Sap, it's 65 games minimum to be eligible for all these awards, to be eligible for All NBA. And they also have said to count towards a game, you need to play, I think, at 20 minutes in that game for it to count as a game. So they were trying to counter the okay, I'm just going to sub in, commit a quick foul, and sub out, and that's a game. So you're not going to be allowed to do that. That 65 game minimum is interesting, Sap, this season, because Giannis and Joel Embiid are right at that threshold right now with, I think, 3 games left to play. Giannis, I think, has played 64 or 63.
Giannis is at 63, Embiid's at 65, Jokic is at 68. Those are your 3 leading MVP contenders. So under this agreement, if it was in place this year, Giannis would have to play in at least 2 of Milwaukee's final 3 games to be eligible for All NBA and MVP. Obviously, Embiid's already reached the 65 game threshold, and Jokic has already gone past it.
Right. So it's interesting too, because the Bucks have the 1 seed wrapped up after the Celtics lost last night. And if we were under the new CBA and Giannis really wanted to go for MVP, he's probably going to be sitting out a lot of these next couple of games, because why play him? Though, I mean, he's Giannis, so he does want to play, but he would have to play in order to be eligible for MVP. So that's an interesting wrinkle that you're seeing this season, that these guys are close, and maybe if they were really going for MVP in some of the games that they missed earlier in the season, they would have played in, because they wanted to make sure they hit that. So I think that's certainly an interesting. It seems like a good number to me, 65. Sap, does that 65 correlate to a specific percentage?
It's
Or
around 80%. It's a little
Okay.
less than 80%. I would have went with 66 because I like even numbers
Right.
rather than odd numbers. They play an 82 game schedule, so 66 rather than 65. But I'm not gonna be nitpicky about that. 65 is right around 80%. So I think that's a fair number. You couldn't go up to 70 because if a player does have an injury and is out for a month or more, and it takes some time to get back, then you can't take him out of the MVP consideration. I mean, a guy can play 68, 69 games and still be certainly an MVP. In fact, the 3 leading vote contenders for MVP are going to be these 3 guys who've played 63, 65, and 68 games respectively. We're talking about Giannis, Embiid, and Jokic, and I think they should finish 1, 2, 3 in some order. In fact, I'd be surprised if anyone else gets a first place vote. I like who?
No one
Luka
should.
or Jason
No,
Tatum? No, I mean the Mavs aren't even going to make the play in. And as great as Tatum has been, that's more of a collaborative effort with the Celtics because they have Jaylen Brown and a great bench and all of that stuff. So it should be those 3 guys. So I think that they've played enough. Once this new CBA goes into effect next year, then it'll be a 65 game minimum, which I think is fair enough. That's a fair number. I don't think you could have gone much higher than that.
Yeah. All right. So we're good with that number, Sap. And again, that also isn't just for MVP. It is for the rest of the awards and the All NBA awards. And Sap, we were just talking about this the other day. The All NBA awards are going to look a little different. It's going to be positionless basketball now. They're going to go with the 15 best players, which I think we talked about this literally last week, Sap.
We did.
That's the way to go. This year you're going to see, like you said, I think like Bam Adebayo on the 3rd team. One of Jokic or Embiid is not going to make first team, which is crazy because you're going to be the top 2 probably MVP vote getters. So that was a good fix, and it also reflects where basketball is in 2023, which is how you should, when you're updating a collective bargaining agreement, it should reflect the sign of the game and the sign of the times.
Yeah, I mean, the positions aren't specific like in football, where obviously you have a quarterback, offensive tackle, wide receiver, edge rusher, cornerback, whatever. In basketball, it's much more positionless. I mean, Jokic is among the league leaders in assists. He's a center. So you got a guy like Luka Doncic, who's a guard, who's averaging nearly double-digit rebounds per game. So yeah, the way the game is played now, it's not old school where you lay out and see a point guard and a shooting guard and a small forward, a power forward, and a center. I mean, there's kind of like bigs, wings, and smaller guys, but it's all positionless at this point. So I think that's a great move. We talked about it last week. Just pick the 15 best players in the league rather than trying to drum up these positions, because I think the 3rd best center in the league is probably Bam Adebayo, right? Because Karl-Anthony Towns is even a center this year. It's more Rudy Gobert with Minnesota, and plus Karl-Anthony Towns has missed half the season.
Right.
DeAndre Ayton, is he really worthy of all NBA? Probably not. I think Bam Adebayo's had a better year, but I don't think of Bam Adebayo as one of the 15 best players in basketball. Top 25, sure. I mean, he made the All-Star team. That by definition means he's one of the 24 best players in the world, but not top 15. He'll probably be 3rd team All-NBA, but that will now be changed with the new CBA, and I think that's another good move by the Players Association and the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we talked about this literally last week, so they might be listening. I don't know, Sap, but a good change. And though we talked about it under the guise, Sap, of Jaylen Brown specifically, in that he needs to make All NBA this year to kick in for that Supermax extension. Well, not anymore, as the NBA and the Players Association have come to an agreement that a lot of people are actually calling the Jaylen Brown rule, which means that under this new CBA, under the old CBA, you could only sign an extension that increased your salary by 20% in the first season of the new deal. And Brown wasn't going to be able to do that unless you made, a going to be able to exceed that unless he made an all NBA team or won MVP or whatever. Now that 20% number has been increased to 40%. So you essentially can now sign a super max contract without having made an all NBA team or winning MVP or anything like that. And you can do it, whenever the team sort of deems it fit. So this offseason, the Celtics can put in front of Jaylen Brown that super max, 40% increase, and presumably he would sign it because we talked about this last week, right? No one's turned that down. So that puts less of an emphasis on making all NBA. Financially, it's still, an award. Obviously, it's an honor that players want, but it does really help out teams retaining their own players without having to worry about maybe a voter not deciding to put somebody on an all NBA team.
Right. I mean, under the old deal, 4 years, 161 for Jaylen Brown would be the max. Now it's 4 years, 189 million. So it's 28 million more. It's 7 million more per season. That's significant money. It could go up as high as 557 million a year. So the options are much better for the Celtics and Jaylen Brown to try to get a deal done this summer, when I think you want to get a deal done. You don't want him going to the final season of his contract, because you may have to look to move him in the offseason, which you don't want to do. So this is a good thing for Jaylen Brown and the Celtics. And, the idea is to try to keep players on their team so there isn't as much movement as there is in the league. I find the movement intriguing and what makes the league, fascinating, because, I know we're going to talk about Kyrie Irving, who's going to be going to his 5th team next year, since he announced is most likely to file for free agency this summer. So that to me makes the league incredible, just like we see now in football with quarterbacks moving, whether it's Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers. Before that, it had been Brady and Matt Stafford and Russell Wilson, and all superstar quarterbacks on the move.
Right.
You never saw that before. I like the fact that there's movement in the NBA, but you don't want to have it that it's totally chaotic and that the teams just kind of lose out on their player that they've groomed, they've put a lot of time in, and have seen become a superstar like Jaylen Brown, and then he walks away. It puts them in a tough situation. You want to obviously go in for a championship run, but you also don't want the player to just walk without getting very little in return. So I think that that's a place where the teams and the players will both benefit from this new CBA, which goes into effect next year.
Yeah, anything that gets the players more money, I'm in
Mhm.
favor of, because it is you're talking you're talking about billionaires versus millionaires, and it sounds like, oh wow, millionaires and billionaires, who cares? Let them fight each other. Is a significant difference between a billionaire and a millionaire. So it's I'm all for the players getting more money. That's who the people pay their hard-earned money to go see. So that I think that makes a lot of sense. And with every subsequent CBA, I think you can kind of track this in the NBA, is that they're trying to level the playing field as much as possible for the smaller market teams, to say, okay, you can retain these guys earlier. They want to make it easier for the Memphises and the Clevelands and those types of teams to be able to keep their players, as opposed to them, leaving and going to join the Lakers or the Celtics, or the Nets. And so, I think that this helps those teams too. And the NBA is always trying to keep as much of a competitive balance as possible. There's always going to be, like you've said this multiple times, Sap, like no matter what, you can sign the contract extension a year later, you can request a trade. It's not going to prevent any players from doing that. There's no penalty against doing that for the player. And 99% of the time the teams acquiesce, because they don't want to have, that the specter of the player hating being there and getting booed. So they end up trading them. So that's obviously, player movement's not going away, but this should curb it a little bit. But it's still, those trade requests are going to come no matter what, Sap.
And you look at a player like Jaylen Brown, this will be his 3rd contract, right? His rookie contract, his 1st extension. This will be his 3rd contract. At the end of this, he'll still only be 30, 31 years old. He can then go sign elsewhere at that age if he's put 12 years in with the Celtics and then wants to move. You just don't necessarily want players moving that quickly. And we've seen it. I mean, Shaq left Orlando after 4 years. Anthony Davis, I believe, was in his 7th season in New Orleans when he pretty much shut it down and demanded a trade to the Lakers. You'd
Right.
like to at least give the team an opportunity for that 2nd and 3rd contract with the player and see how you play it out. So hopefully for the Celtics, this means Brown and Tatum will be together for another contract. this gives you more of a runway to try to win a championship. I've always felt that this year is so important because you don't know what the next year brings you. So if you don't win the championship this year and one of the two players decides that they want to go elsewhere, now it's difficult to keep them together. But I also feel that with Jaylen Brown, that I know he did an interview, I believe, was with Shams
Stadium. With
recently.
Shams.
Right. So he seemed more in line with staying here. Talked about his relationship with Jason Tatum and how they have a lot of unity, that they've accomplished a lot, which is a bit much. I mean, they've been really good together. They haven't really accomplished a whole lot because they haven't won a championship. If they're able to do that now, you can go with that narrative. But it seems like he's more amenable to staying in Boston based on that interview with Shams. I mean, with the New York Times and the Athletic, it didn't seem that way, or the Ringer, it didn't seem that way. But now maybe he's changing a little bit. And let's not forget, the interview he did with the Ringer was months ago. So
Right.
maybe he's had some change of heart. But this does put the Celtics in a better position to keep Jaylen Brown, and it gives Jaylen Brown an opportunity to make more money, which is always a good thing for the players.
Yeah, absolutely. And, money is obviously the key component with all these CBAs. And so continue to talk about it. That's going to be, that's a lot of these changes do revolve around money. A big complaint of some of those smaller market teams that we have talked about, Sap, is that these bigger market teams like the Golden State Warriors, especially, just kind of blow past the luxury tax and the salary cap and just pay a luxury tax. They don't care. Now there's been a repeater tax. Again, that's just more money. But now essentially the NBA is trying to curb that as much as possible by putting an apron over it, where you're saying, okay, if you do this, we're going to take away more things from you. Not saying you can't do it, but if you do it, we're going to penalize you, not just with money, but you won't have a mid-level exemption to give to free agents. You won't be able to trade first-round picks, and you won't be able to send cash away in a trade. So they're trying to take away some tools of teams to combat them just blowing past the salary cap and not caring about the luxury tax. So this is via CBS. These are what the exact stipulations are for this new apron. So no cash sent out in trades. Teams are ordinarily allowed to include a certain amount of cash in trades per season. You can't do that anymore. You cannot trade first round picks that are more than 6 years into the future. And you cannot make trades in which they take back more salary than they send out. According to Keith Smith, who does a really great job with salary cap stuff, he's covered the Celtics for a long time too. There are a couple of trades in recent years and signings that would not have been allowed now under this new apron. Kevin Durant wouldn't have been able to go to Phoenix. Kyrie wouldn't have been able to go to Dallas. James Harden wouldn't have been able to go to Brooklyn a few years ago. Malcolm Brogdon this past offseason wouldn't have been able to go to the Celtics. Norman Powell and Robert Covington wouldn't have been able to go to the Clippers. And a lot of these traded player exemptions for pick deals wouldn't have been able to happen. So it's a significant new change, Sap.
I think what happens is when you do something like this, you kind of overreact a bit and then you walk it back a little bit. I mean, maybe we're seeing this with the pitch clock in baseball. They're going to adhere to it strictly going forward, but maybe they'll loosen the reins a little bit. So you want to kind of get everyone in line, and maybe there's ways to get through this. I want to see player movement, but I also don't want to hamstring some of these franchises. And again, when someone puts forth $4.1 billion to buy a franchise, they want some protections
Right.
that they can at least be competitive. Especially you brought up like John Morant in Memphis, De'Aaron Fox in Sacramento, superstar young players. You want to see them grow with their franchises. You could really be draconian and do what? Take draft picks away from teams if they're repeat violators? Or do you start taking away home games? There's 82 games in a season, 41 home, 41 away. All of a sudden you make it 44 away, 38 at home. I mean, now you're really being pretty draconian with moves like that. But, Golden State will continue to violate this because they're not afraid to spend $400 million on their payroll. The Golden State Warriors spend more on payroll and taxes, luxury taxes, et cetera, than any team, not just in basketball, in any professional league, right? More than baseball teams, football teams, which have a salary cap. Obviously, hockey teams aren't even in competition with the other three
Right.
in terms of salary. So they'll just go ahead and do it. And they know they have a short window with Curry, Thompson, Draymond Green, Andrew Wiggins, and the rest of that team. Maybe they'll have a reset in a couple of years when those players start to retire. But again, I think you just want to just rein it in a little bit. But, again, with all of these things, I'm sure every team has really bright people working in their front office. We'll try to figure out a way to get through this and find some sort of path to get done what they want to get done.
Yeah, the players weren't happy with this. They've been long-standing, and makes sense, opposed to any sort of, upper salary limit. They want teams to obviously go past the salary cap because they want more player contracts. They don't care what the owners spend. Draymond Green tweeted this out after especially that news about that tax line. He said, "Players lose again. Middle and lower spectrum teams don't spend because they don't want to. They want to lose, so increase their spending capabilities just to increase them. They continue to cut out the middle, and this is what we rush into a deal for. Never fails. I've never seen somebody go to the table with assets that makes an entire machine go and lose every time." So Draymond Green not happy with, I think, that specifically, that rule. But I think overall, and I don't know if he represents the feelings of all the players, but overall doesn't seem happy with the new CBA.
Well, Draymond, who now considers himself part of the media and better than everybody that's in the media, has his very successful podcast. So he's going to weigh in on these issues. I don't think he's part of the executive board
He's
of
not,
the Players
no.
Association, right? Which is not a surprise. You have CJ McCollum as the president, and then among the vice presidents include Kyrie Irving and Grant Williams and Jaylen
Well, Kyrie
Brown.
Irving's done, thank God. His term is served.
Okay, there you go. So he can move on his merry ways. But you have players that are involved with that, but I don't picture Draymond Green being that guy, because I think if Draymond Green got involved in negotiations, nothing would get done. I think
No, doesn't have the personality for that.
Right, he's a contrarian, right? He's just going to, push back. He's a talk show host now, and part of the nature of being a good talk show host is to push back and be different. So, good for Draymond. That's why he's going to be a superstar on TV when he joins TNT, whenever his playing days are over. I think he's going to be fabulous at that. But yeah, again, I think the players had to be careful here. You don't want to give up things, but you also realize that there's a lot of money at stake, and the TV deal is what drives everything. When you're talking $7.5 billion a year, just from TV, let alone ticket sales, concessions, merchandising, overseas sales, et cetera, that's a chunk of money, which is $250 million per team per year. I mean, the salary cap's going to get up to $200 million, pretty quickly. And just think about how much players are going to make at that point. If you're making 35% of 200 million, which is, what the max will be for certain players, you're talking $70 million a year. You're going to see the day, maybe in 3 or 4 years, when the highest salaried player in the NBA is making $70 million a year, which is still more than the highest paid baseball player or even the highest paid football player. So I think the players are smart enough to understand, let's not screw this up. Let's fight for everything we can, but let's not have a work stoppage, because that would be an awful look when you've got so much money at stake.
Right, and you have so much momentum going forward. So yeah, I think definitely Sap. And some other notable things in the CBA was that they approved the midseason tournament to be played. It's regular season games will count towards it, and then essentially what's gonna happen is whatever two teams are in the finals of the tournament, it'll be held in Las Vegas, and they'll play what ends up to amounts to one extra game than the other teams in the regular season. The winning team gets some sort of financial bonuses. I don't know if it's going to start officially next year or the following year. They seem to be unclear on that, but that's happening. Sap, do anything about that one?
I don't really have strong feelings on it, only because it's going to still be part of the regular season. So it's just, Portland's playing whoever, and that game's played during the regular season, but it's kind of part of this tournament. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't really see a big deal with that. And two teams play one extra game. I mean, now how does that impact the playoff races? So now you have two teams playing 83 games. Maybe Mikal Bridges gets involved in that. He actually plays 84 games during the regular season, because he's on pace to play 83 because of the trade. God bless Mikal Bridges. He's anti-load management. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have a problem with that. I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. Again, I just want to see if all the players play in this thing. But again, it's just part of the regular season, so it almost feels like it's just going to be part of the regular season with a few bells and whistles attached to it.
I could see the first championship or tournament championship game getting very good ratings because I think people will be curious
Mhm.
and the NBA thinking it's a big success, and then I think it will drop off. I just don't. We've talked about this before with the tournament idea. American audiences aren't conditioned for that. European audiences are, and I
Mhm.
just don't see that they'll care because it's fairly or not, it's a championship or bust mindset with a lot of these teams,
Right.
especially the good teams, especially teams that have history. Like the Celtics or the Lakers. Are fans going to really care if they win a midseason tournament and
No.
they're not competing for a championship? No. So again, I think there might be some curiosity in year one, but other than that, I don't think that people are going to really invest in this.
Yeah, it works in Europe because in the European soccer leagues, the champion's crowned based on the regular season. There's no postseason. So the EPL, whoever has the most points is the champion. They don't have a postseason. Here, it's all based on the postseason. I mean, we've spent 6 months in the NBA with load management, just trying to get teams seated properly for the playoffs, and you go from there. So I think all of that is going to be worked its way out. But it's good basketball, and I agree with you. Probably the first year it'll be intriguing, depending on who the teams are. But then after that, it may lose a little of its steam. I think the play-in has been successful, right? I mean, this is going to be the fourth year of the
Yes,
play-in,
it
and I
has.
think that's worked out, right? Because now you got 20 of 30 teams still battling with a week left in the season.
And the
And
stakes seem more real with that than,
sure,
something in,
yep,
make the playoffs. Okay, that's, very tangible. Arbitrary. You won the midseason tournament doesn't really seem like stakes.
yeah. And who's going to remember that? I mean, you have a midseason tournament. Say it happens after the Super Bowl. Just throw that out there. Like 2 months later starts the playoffs. Are you going to really remember who won the midseason tournament? Probably not.
Yeah. So that's adopted. A couple other interesting things before we get to Kyrie Irving, Sap. The NBA is officially stopping testing for marijuana, which they've done various times before, but this is the first time it's in the new CBA. Good. It obviously makes no sense for any league to test for marijuana anymore. It's legal in many states, and players were doing it anyways. So good decision by the NBA. Sap, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. This should have been done years and years ago. It to me seems like something that kind of surprises you when you hear this, that it wasn't already taken care of in the last CBA. But we've made strides over the last 7, 10 years in society, and obviously the NBA is just following that. Good move.
Um, this is a really interesting one, Sap. Your NBA players under this new CBA are going to now be allowed to invest in NBA and WNBA teams as active players. Presumably only with their team. And with the WNBA, they can invest in any team, and WNBA players maybe can too. But this is the first league, to my knowledge, that has allowed this, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, this I don't think is a slippery slope. I mean, the WNBA teams, they could use all the financing they can get, so that's a good thing. And I know NBA players really support the WNBA. They have a really strong connection, and that's great. And the NBA finances the WNBA, which is a good thing. As far as investing in your own team, okay, so say a player invests some money into the franchise. Now they're part of management, right? They're not just a player. Then how complicated does it get to trade that player? If you have two players of equal standing and one's invested in the team and the other hasn't, is that setting any type of signal to the teammates? That one is something I think I have to think about more, and maybe let that breathe a little bit, because that does seem a bit complicated.
Yeah, and I don't know if that will just, again, to really invest in a team to have an actual percentage of it. You're talking about some serious money, so there will be. It's kind of limited what players will be able to financially afford doing that. Yes, LeBron James obviously will be able to financially afford doing that. Steph Curry, but not that many. So I don't see this affecting a whole lot of players. Um,
Just like
but
profit sharing, where they'll take 10% of your contract and
I don't
put it into
know how,
ownership. Like
again,
it
too,
seems odd.
you don't want it to, because obviously it's against the rules to offer players things that you don't want to have anything that goes against, like, your set player contract. You don't want to
Mhm.
offer them like they're giving you Joe Smith money in his shoe, and you don't want to give things that offset that, favors
Right.
or anything like that. So you don't want to say, okay, you give a little money back, we'll give you a little piece of ownership. That would be against the rules. So this is a little bit of a confusing mechanism. Again, I'm all for players making more money, so I'm fine with that aspect of it, but I'm not 100% sure how it will work. Also, they're allowing players under this new CBA to do sponsorships with gambling companies, but they're saying that as long as it doesn't promote the gambling component, that seems a little confusing. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin Ridley would probably like to have an opinion on this based on his suspension from the NFL for putting in a 5-team parlay when he was with the
Right.
Atlanta Falcons, and now he's with Jacksonville. This is a weird one for me because I look at that and that becomes a bit problematic. And look, I'm all in favor of legalized gambling. It's all great, but I mean, I don't think you want to ever put thoughts in people's minds that something is not on the up and up, and that there's
Right.
something taking place that isn't good. I mean, who was the recent player? I think it was Bradley Beal, who ended up like knocking someone's hat off. Some fan that
Yes,
ran up
that's
to
right.
him after the game and said, "You cost me $1,300." You don't need that. Like, you don't need that as a player who's making a lot of money and got their own issues to go out and play their best to try to win a game. So that one's a little bit strange. And back to the ownership of the team, the Phoenix Suns were just sold for $4.1 billion. Like 1% of that is $41 million in cash, right? Like,
Yeah.
Here's $41 million. I own 1%. I'm sure, like you said, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, all have that type of money. But now you're limiting it. Obviously, if it's the Phoenix Suns, the players on the Suns, I guess Chris Paul and Kevin Durant would probably be the first two that come to mind. But what happens if Kevin Durant isn't happy there after a while? Does he sell his share? Does he get
Like, does he
traded?
have to? Yeah,
Right.
you don't
That
want to
stuff
own
is
a
weird.
percentage of a team you're not on. You can't. That
No,
isn't gonna work.
no.
Um,
These are weird things. I mean, there's something along these lines that I think has to be flushed out a little bit more.
And the last thing, Sap, was something that didn't happen. The one and done rule remains. The age limit for the NBA will continue. So players coming out of high school will still not be able to join the league. I'm really disappointed by this. The fans wanted the high school players back. This really seemed to be something that the players were against because they want to protect roster spots, the veterans. But I'm disappointed in the players for not lobbying a little bit harder for this. Especially, I know LeBron James isn't part of the law, the executive committee, but he did come out of high school. He's the most powerful player in the league. I would have liked him to at least weigh in on this, considering that was his path to the NBA. So I think that that's disappointing.
Yeah, it is. And again, I don't think it really impacts college basketball because most of the teams we saw in the Final Four, even the Elite Eight, were made up of veteran teams, right? I mean, you had
Right.
guys in their second and third year. There were a couple that were in their fourth year. I think one was in their fifth year of college basketball. I think one of the players was as old as like Jason Tatum. I mean, so it's not impacting college basketball. We see the one and done, the teams that practice one and done aren't as powerful as they used to be. I mean, Duke had 3 of the top 5 recruits last year, and they were knocked out in the second round because I think
Right.
what happens is a lot of those players, they're protecting themselves to go into the NBA in a year, whereas the other players that play there for 3 or 4 years, this is the pinnacle of their career. So trying to win a national championship is it. And now with NIL money, they can stay longer and at least make some money before they move on, whether they play professionally or not. So I would have been in favor of just going back to the old way of letting the high school kids in because I don't think it's going to impact college basketball. And if the kid's ready, he's ready.
Right. And should be able to earn a living. But that sort of wraps up like bird's eye view of the CBA. Sap, real quick, we did want to touch on the Kyrie stuff. The Mavs may be shutting him and Luka down for the rest of the season. They're very disappointing. Kyrie is a free agent after this season. He said he's going to test free agency. Where's he going to end up, Sap?
Well, I think there's one of 6 spots. The 2 LA teams come to mind, Lakers and Clippers, but I'm going to put them to the side. 2 Western Conference teams that I think could be a good fit for Kyrie Irving. Is there ever a good fit for Kyrie Irving?
No.
If Denver gets knocked out in the first or second round, don't they have to make a splash move? And Kyrie Irving with Jokic and Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr., I think that would be a pretty good team, right? I mean, I think he could work well with Jokic, although you'd have two really poor defenders on the court in crunch time. You also have two phenomenal offensive players there. Another team in the Western Conference could be New Orleans. You look at if he joined Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, you'd have three Dookies on the same team together. We know they have a brotherhood, so that could be another landing spot. You put the three Dookies with CJ McCollum. New Orleans would look pretty good. Two teams in the Eastern Conference. Maybe the Knicks want to make that gigantic splash that they haven't been able to make for so many years. I mean, could he and Jalen Brunson work in the same backcourt? I think they could. And the Knicks would look at it as, okay, we're bringing in a real superstar, although, he had his problems in New York when he was with Brooklyn. The team that makes the most sense for me, the Miami Heat, because they were in discussions with Brooklyn several months ago. At least that's what we heard. They have a strong culture, great executive in Pat Riley, maybe the best coach in the business, and Eric Spoelstra. Kyle Lowry seems to be at the end of his career. You got
they're
Hero.
Desperate.
They are. They've kind of lost contact with the top teams in the East. And how incredible would be Kyrie and Jimmy Butler on the same team? That would be must-watch TV. The practices would be phenomenal. I mean, I just picture Jimmy Butler like punching and knocking out Kyrie Irving at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting fit. To me, I think there's a good chance he stays in the Mavericks. If he doesn't, I think the Clippers or the Heat, Sap, I think that's a great idea, great potentially a good fit. But I think wherever he goes, it's not going to work. I mean, he's 5 for 5 in destroying teams. So, or what is it, 4 for 4?
4 for 4 so far. Yeah,
sorry, 4 for 4. So I have no confidence he's going to be able to figure it out. And the Mavericks are saying they want him back, and they want to figure this out. You can blame Kyrie, you can not blame Kyrie for this, but fact is the proof's in the record that the team's played terrible since him and Luka have been on the court together. Maybe they need an offseason to figure it out. I think the deficiencies defensively are real. And I think that, again, his track record shows it for himself. He destroys teams. So wherever he goes, I would imagine every team should be gun shy. And the Heat are desperate, but I don't know how desperate they are to bring in this guy. So we'll have to see, Sap. But I don't have any faith that he's going to impact winning on any team he goes to at this point in his career.
He never really has. Seriously, no. I mean, he left Cleveland. They still went back to the finals. He left the Celtics. They've played better since he left. He left Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's kind of maintained the same place they were earlier in the season. And Dallas has gone from the 4 seed to the 13 seed on the outside looking in. So, yeah, he's not a guy that impacts winning. He's entertaining as all hell, and maybe a franchise that's desperate will sign him to sell tickets and be talked about on ESPN and Fox Sports 1 on a daily basis because he does have that type of star power.
Yeah. So we'll have to see, but that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Make sure you check out our social medias if you're not already, at John Sap 25, at Jet Stryer, and you can find the podcast wherever podcasts are found. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Go check out their website. Lots of great stuff on there as always. And Sap, you and I will be back later with a new podcast. So thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you later. See ya.